Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. Did you happen to participate in Amazon's Prime Day 2-day shopping event? Well, you probably did. The online shopping behemoth saw record sales for its biggest event of the year ever. U.S. shoppers spent a record $14.2 billion during Amazon's 2-day Prime event. Now, that's up 11% year over year, according to Adobe Analytics data. Now, while a lot of people were searching for money-saving deals, more debt is a concern for many others, or at least it should be. Well, tonight, we are talking about the keys to managing those spending habits. My guests are financial advisor Muriel Garr and Dr. Curtis Kidd Telemark, director of the HPS Center for Financial Excellence at the Howard University School of Business. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Sure thing.
Fantastic.
So, according to a University of Iowa study, in May of this year, about 5.8% of the general population in the U.S. currently suffers from a compulsive buying disorder or shopping addiction. Muriel, you are not a physician, but we can call you Dr. Money. And, and I'm sure you've had some people in your circle, friends, relatives, who are just constantly shopping and made you say, But what is it about those people that you've observed that made you say, about their shopping habits?
Well, first of all, thank you for another opportunity to spend some time with you this evening. I think we as a society forget that we have ills. We have social ills, we have psychological ills, we have physical ills. All those ills together actually turn into some type of behavior to put a Band-Aid on an issue that needs a tourniquet. So when you see someone who is addicted to shopping or addicted to the accumulation of things, which is as a result of spending their money or someone else's money, i.e. credit, you have to ask first yourself before you judge them, what is it that's really going on with that person? Because it's something going on emotionally that they are trying to cure by continuing to spend and to accumulate things. For those individuals that you spoke of that just spent all this money on Amazon Prime Day, bought things that they didn't need with money that they didn't have, more often than not, it is something else that they are trying to adjust for. A bad relationship, something that somebody didn't give me, something inside of me where I feel insignificant. And so this is the only way that I can this is my outlet. For some people, the outlet is food. For other people, the outlet is sex. For other people, the outlet is drugs. Other people, the outlet is alcohol. Anything that we do in excess is tied to something else that is going on in us or that has developed in us as a result of the soil that we've grown in.
Dr. Telemark, I'm sure, like Muriel, you've come across some people who just seem to have this thing about spending. Look, I can admit, I like to look good. I like to go shopping, but I also would like to think that I do have a sense of self-control where I can go strolling through the mall and spend, an hour or two window shopping and not spend a dime. But then there are some people, who can't do that. What do you think is going on with them, Dr. Telemark, where they got to go to the mall? I got to get something. As Muriel suggested, I got to make myself feel good.
Yeah, so I would concur with my colleague Muriel's sort of psychological exploration of these individuals, right? However, psychology is not my forte. It is not my area of research, but finance is. And
Mhm.
so let me play a bit of devil's advocate here. So, actually, to answer your question straight up, the likelihood is that the compulsive desire to accumulate things is because you are missing something, right?
Mhm.
Almost exactly what she said. But now let me play devil's advocate. We do live in America, and in America, we are a consumption country. We almost, the absolute economy in and of itself almost needs some sort of level of spend to keep going, right? So now if you ask me, what about the compulsive desire to spend versus just spending to sort of propel the economy, I have two different answers for you.
Go ahead.
Spending to sort of keep the economy going is one thing that makes the GDP go, the American GDP. On the other hand, any sort of compulsive desire to do anything, again, the psychology is not my forte, but I would probably have to venture to say that it is out of balance.
You
Mhm.
know, if I could just volley that back. So from a standpoint of the whole gross domestic product, the GDP, um, the average consumer doesn't even know what it is. However, I would submit to my colleague that we have been brainwashed to believe that our spending to stimulate the economy is more important than our own self-worth. And so, Muriel, why do you say that? Because, you know,
Yes, Muriel, why do you say that?
because, uh, let's think about it from a standpoint of Black folks, because I'm a Black person.
Yes.
Um, we fought hard to have ML King holiday. And it's ironic that many of us use that day to go shopping because society used that day as a sale day and percentage off. And so they convinced us in our mind, they played the psychological game with us that, yes, you fought to have this holiday, which you should be commemorating in a certain way, but it's more important for you to get 25% off this pair of tennis shoes that's on this day than it is for you to celebrate it another day. And then the media says, well, as a result of what you spend, we're able to keep more people employed, dot, 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 dot. But what they never tell you is if you control what it is that you spend, such that you are in control with how your money is making money for you, you can control the bigger picture. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, it
If
does.
if we, hey
And
Harold, if we playing volley, you got to give me a volley back.
well, yeah, go ahead. Your serve.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So, I would probably say I don't know those people who go and shop on MLK Day. I'm not saying that there aren't any, and now I definitely wouldn't say there's most because I don't have any quantifiable data that supports that. Second, I would definitely say that the generation of cash inside of a company, right? Or we can say revenue, but I'm going to say cash inside of a company does impact the GDP. Now, I would say for myself or any of my colleagues, and definitely not my students, that there has not been anyone that has convinced me that spending is more important than our mental health. And so, therefore, the types of students that we sort of put forward at the Howard University School of Business are those specifically that Mario was saying we're looking for investments that would either involve some sort of passive investment or an active investment where we can find these companies that people are going to spend, I guess, during MLK Day and invest in those companies. That's who we are talking about. So that's who I'm talking about. So anybody else who goes to spend because they got some sort of problem and they want to spend on MLK Day, a day of service, then I probably don't really talk to them that much.
But see, that's why Howard is the crown jewel.
But hold on, let me stop you. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole because there are a couple of points that I want to stick to. And the first point that Muriel made about shopping on MLK Day. MLK Day as a national holiday, a federal holiday, is 41 years old. We are all of the age to remember when it happened. And for the first handful of years, there were no MLK Day sales. It was, and I can't speak to why. Perhaps people thought it may have been sacrilege, politically incorrect, because of who the holiday represented. But to Muriel's point, eventually, okay, the commerce-based American thought process began to slide into MLK Day sales, number one. Number two, I know you spoke about, Dr. Telemark, the gross domestic product, but the thing I want to focus on is the GDD, the gross domestic debt. In other words, how gross is your debt in your own house? And I think that one of the issues that we are seeing is, as you talked about investments, one of the things, anecdotally speaking, when I have conversations with some people about your investments, not just for retirement, but just investments as a way of accumulating, capital for yourself, a lot of people say they can't do that because why? Because they have GDD, they have gross domestic debt. And I think when we talk about the accumulation of your own debt, and keep in mind that GDD is something that I made up. There is no gross domestic debt as far as, and I just made that up.
You need to trademark that.
I could. But I want you both to speak to, the reality is that, as Dr. Telemark said, we are a consumer-based society. And, in this last minute, I'll have you started, what's going on that we are still getting ourselves in trouble, Muriel? I'll let you start, and I'll give you about 30 seconds, and then we're going to take a break, and we'll continue that on the other side.
So let's, we have to be honest, all of us as African-Americans engaging in this conversation right now, is that the data shows that African-Americans are the greatest consumers. And as the greatest consumer, the data also shows that we have the lowest percentage of savings, which goes to your GDD. And so we have to really, in my opinion, be really realistic as to why it is that we spend more than we have to get things that we sometimes need but don't need to satisfy the opinions that others have about us, or to satisfy our own insecurities. And we're not thinking long term.
So hold that point, because I want you to continue on the other side. We are going to take a break, but I want to remind all of you that you can hear and see every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. I'm Harold Fisher. The original Quiet Storm with John Mons is next on WHUR. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the keys to managing your spending habits. My guests our financial advisor, Muriel Garr, and Dr. Curtis Kidd Telemark, director of the HPS Center for Financial Excellence at the Howard University School of Business. Before the break, we were talking about a term that I'll probably coin, your GDD, your gross domestic debt, your gross amount of debt that you have in your own household. Muriel, continue your point.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate, particularly for us as people of color, that we don't even realize that we have been subtly brainwashed to spend, 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 not save, 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 save. And we're doing it for various reasons. There's a small percentage of us that understand that we need to be living off of less than what we earn in order to be able to own companies, to own land, to have an investment portfolio where we're living off of what that investment portfolio puts off. But that's not necessarily what we've been taught. That's not the conversations that the majority of us have at the dinner table. The conversations that we have is more about, oh, girl, I just got me a new pair of red bottoms. Oh, girl, I want to buy me a new car. Oh, girl, I'm going to the Bahamas and I'm using my credit card. Those are the types of conversations that we have. We're not having conversations on, hey, look, this community is spending X amount of dollars on this. And we know that they spend more than they are made. So we probably need to go ahead and invest in that because we're going to make money off of their bad behaviors. And so we get into this rut about doing things, and it's a superficial gain. It's not a gain that is going to take us to the next level economically. And I would submit to you, in part, it is because we are uneasy holding each other accountable with the why. Why did you have to go buy this? Why did you have to go buy that? You know, and I'll flip it real quick. During the pandemic, I was having conversations with the people that were on my short list as things were going on. And I was like, look, I told you that you need to be saving money. You need to be living off of this. Interest rates are going down. Now's the time for you to do one or two things. Either go purchase some real estate or refinance the real estate that you have. If you went into forbearance, I told you when you went into forbearance, don't go spending that money on accumulating some stuff. Make sure you sit that money aside so that you can flip out of forbearance, leverage the negative and low interest rates. For those who listen to me, thumbs up. They're up. And their savings is still there. For those who didn't listen, they're like, now their call is, I tried to do a workout. I spent that money. What'd you spend it on? Places and things. Places and things.
Dr. Telemark.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there from what my colleague said, right? And I want to say that the psychology of the consumer is not necessarily my forte. I do have colleagues that do research these things, and they can probably tell you more precisely what the issue is. But I would say in most places that I've been, America, of course, being one of those that are sort of a consumer-based economy, I'd probably say South Africa, another. I'd even say Ghana, another, and some of Western Europe, also the same. African Americans, as we know them here, let me just say Black Africans who have been touched by colonization seem to have the same sort of issue, right? And it could be for a myriad different reasons, like my colleague suggested on the psychological front. But let me tell you, from an economical point of view, if I am in power and I control the means of the economy, then I definitely want you to buy. And I want you to think that you have to buy, right? And I would even argue that I would support all things that would sort of propel you to buy, right? So if MLK is a day that I know that you have off, then of course, why wouldn't I have some sort of discount for that day and move you closer to a consumerist sort of attitude, right? And so I I do concede that our people have often been a victim of this. But I
Mhm.
also would concede that we knew at a time that our dollar should stay in our community. And if that was the case at or around that time, then I would also like to put forward that consumerism within our community, if the dollar stayed in our community, might actually be a decent thing. Now, if you then start to pull back the GDD, I would probably say it doesn't make much sense to buy anything that doesn't give you a return on investment that is higher than what it's costing you to buy it, right? And so
Mm.
what that definitely means is you have an Amex card and you have to pay 15% on it, but the thing you buy doesn't return 15%. So let's just use the psychological terms, and in economics it's called utility. It gives you a sense of utility, but that utility doesn't meet on your balance sheet to go over the liability cost, then you are doing a disservice to your balance sheet. Period.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Telemark, because I think this is really important when we're just talking about spending, and I think it goes back to um, what I was saying before, where you, whether it's red bottoms or a new suit or something, or investing. When you are talking to young people, students or otherwise, uh, do you get any kind of resistance from them or pushback regarding investing? And this is why I ask, because if we're talking about controlling one's spending habits, to your point, unless you buy something that costs $100 and 15 years from now, you still have that same $100 thing that you bought on your credit card and you paid it off at the end of the month and it still works, that, but a lot of times people go into debt, they use credit, they do, and they're still paying for something that they may not even have anymore. But investments are a different kind of thing.
Yes. And so what I have noticed in my students, the younger students, let me be clear, the undergraduates, is
Mhm.
that when you speak the sermon of save, it doesn't hit their ear as palatable as when you speak the sermon of investing. I don't know why it is, and let me sort of unpack what that means. If I say, like Muriel was saying, hey, you need to save your money, as opposed to buying red bottom shoes, I would probably say 6 out of 10 times they'll go buy the red bottom shoes. But if I say something, at least for my students at the School of Business, if I say, hey, who makes red bottom shoes? Let's just say that is Harold Fisher Red Bottoms, I don't know,
Mhm.
company, right? And then I say, over the last 3 years, have you seen revenues in red bottom shoes increase? And then they go and do an exercise and they tell me yes. Then I may say, how much does it cost to buy into that company? I get more of a listening ear when I say maybe you should have some sort of share in that company if it's publicly traded, of course, right? So seemingly the investment sort of sermon is sort of hitting my students a little differently. Now, what I would probably find more remarkable is this after George Floyd, or was this happening before George Floyd? Would probably be something of interest for a researcher like me to find out.
Hmm. Let me ask you this, Muriel. I almost want to say, what's wrong with us? And when I say us, I'm talking about not just Black people, but people who just can't seem to stop spending. And let's say, I know you work with people to get them, out of debt, and we have seen people, for example, who get out of debt, whether they've worked to get out of debt or they file bankruptcy, but they go right back into that. Talk to me about the repercussions of doing that.
Well, it's no different than having an eating disorder, and you go through all of the steps, sometimes drastic surgery, to get rid of the extra weight, and then you go right back into that same behavior again. And so, whenever you go back into an addiction, the impact of the addiction is worse. It's three times worse than it was before. On the debt side, you clear out your debt, but you haven't addressed the issue that actually created the debt, what was going on in your family or inside of you. Then you end up accumulating, and we've seen it, 3 to 4 times more debt than you had initially because you didn't address what was going on before. And some of that has to do with the circle in which you're in. And I just want to pivot slightly because my colleague, on the show said something that I think is really, really very powerful. And it is not that we are accumulating this debt to service our own community. See, if we were accumulating this debt and the money was staying within our own community and it was circulating 5 to 7 times before it left our community, then it really would not be debt, so to speak. It would be that we would be creating this equity where those on the outside would see the increase in value and be investing in, and we would then benefit from the return. Part of this is we have been brainwashed, in my opinion, to believe that without doing X or Y, without having X or Y, that we are not worthy. And that is something that's a lot deeper than what we're talking about on this conversation. We've got
Not necessarily. I think that really goes to the heart of it, and about how people can manage that. And this is why, because if it's about keeping up with the Joneses, and we know that there is that disease that a lot of communities have, not just ours, but we want to impress other people. You started off saying that in the very beginning of the conversation, Muriel. You said, "Hey, girl, guess what I just got?" And I think the issue is, how do you balance the guess what I just bought with making sure that other things don't fall by the wayside, that you don't get those.
It's swimming upstream
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it is definitely swimming upstream. And so we have to look at, we always talked about who should be on your short list from a financial standpoint, an accountant, a banker, da, 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 da. But we also need to talk about who is in our ear and who is in our bed. Who are we listening to and who are we sleeping with? Because that impacts how we see ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, which then spills over to how we spend money and how we value and respect money. So as it was said, I was like, hey, you need to save. Now, to have a conversation and say, okay, let's look at you. If you spending money in this, you need to be reaping the benefits. So you need to be investing in that particular stock. Part of the challenge is when people start seeing quick wins and they're not taking care of the base, then because any investment in the market is not secured. And so when you're rolling the dice and you win, that's great. But when you roll the dice and you lose and you're not paying your rent, you're not paying your car payment, then you've got another situation. It is important, and this is why I applaud you and Howard for doing what you do, that we educate people holistically about this topic called money and about this thing, this resource, and how it needs to be used to actually put us in control. So, one,
Hold on. Muriel, I've got to let Dr. Telemark run because we're going to lose him. But I wanted him to have a final comment about that that term that I made up, that your gross domestic debt versus the other side of developing an investment mindset as opposed to a debt mindset.
You know what? At this point, Harold, I don't want to go. I
Well,
feel like
can you
it's an
say?
asset, man.
Okay, I mean,
I'm gonna go
if
ahead. I'm gonna go ahead and stay.
okay, well, thank you. I
do.
appreciate that.
I think that the conversation definitely needs to be had within our community, specifically, and that this one is a good conversation. So I'm going to just go ahead and piggyback on some of what Muriel was saying. Look, in terms of what it is that we try to do at Howard, and I'll speak to Howard specifically now, and then back to your original discussion point afterwards. Insofar as I think I gave one anecdote in one class. Do you ever remember a show called, I think, Sex in the City, maybe?
Yes.
And Sex in the City, there was a
I was a
character
fan.
there.
Yeah.
There was a character who bought shoes all the time. I think Carrie, maybe her
Carrie.
name. Right.
Yeah.
And I think one of those episodes, she was asking one of her friends, maybe Charlotte, for some money. And Charlotte gave her the truth and said, well, look, if you wouldn't buy any shoes all the time, then you would have money. Right. And so my point for even bringing that up is that there are a lot of things that impact specifically Black people. I'm going to, like my colleague said, I'm Black, so let me speak from the Black perspective, right? That impact us in a way that almost sort of propel us to buy. I mean, I think there used to be a sort of music we used to call the bling bling era, right? Where we would almost, you want to show how much you have by what it is that you sort of wear, right? Then there was always an era of going to the club and buying up the club, right? And so anyway, the reason I brought those anecdotes about is I don't know if I would tell my students not to. What I would probably tell my students is, all right, well, who owns the club? Who owns the shoes, right? And if you start to understand that, at least this is my thoughts, if you start to understand that and have a discussion about it, then maybe you wouldn't be so frivolous with the money, or maybe you would say, I still want the shoes, but I also want a piece of who's making these shoes. And if that is the case, I would be happy if a student X would say, you know what, I spent $100 on, let's say, Jordans. I want to say I'm from Detroit, so I never buy Jordans, by the way. so let's say they spend $100 on Jordans, but they also can tell me, hey, you know what? Nike has been going up in revenue, and I think I want to buy a Nike share of stock or something of the sort, right? So I'd be happy with that in terms of a lesson being taught. And I think that this is sort of Muriel's point when she's saying, hey, look, your community is not benefiting here, right? And so how can you get your community to benefit? It could be by saving all that stuff that you're giving outside of our community or spend inside of our community. Yeah. And I think I concur.
And what I would add to that is what he is saying is, let's reverse the consumer mindset to the entrepreneur mindset. Ownership is totally different. So if your friends are all doing red bottoms and you like, I ain't wearing red bottoms, but since all y'all crazy enough to go buy them with money that y'all ain't got, then I'm crazy enough to go invest in the company that produces them. And no offense with red bottoms, so I don't want nobody calling me. I'm smart enough to go and invest. And I may even decide that I'm gonna hook up and open up a shoe store in the neighborhood because I know you're gonna be coming in and buying them.
But let me and I think it's wonderful when we raise the bar to the entrepreneurial and investment level. But let's talk about some foundational stuff, Muriel. Um, we've talked about what's wrong. So how do we fix it? If when you see the debt collectors calling, okay, when you are getting you just paid that credit card bill, and then it's next month. Here it comes yet again. How do run through some steps in your mind, Muriel, that would be helpful for someone who says, I'm sick of this financial bondage.
Well,
That,
first, you have to really be sick of it, because sometimes we say, I'm sick of it. And what we're really sick of is just not being able to say, to participate in the conversation. So first, there is a self-awareness. After the self-awareness, and we become committed to, I'm going to get out of this. We need to look and see what does that debt landscape look like? And based on what it looks like, how are we going to get out of it? Is it going to mean that in order to get out of it, we need to file bankruptcy? And yes, for those who know, my career has been in financial services. And so, it's taboo to tell people to file bankruptcy. No, bankruptcy is a financial tool. And the reality of it is that debt is caused by certain things that are going on within us or around us, and debt causes things. It causes strokes. It causes heart attacks. All of
mm,
it. It destroys families. And so if the debt is something that cannot be controlled, if you are living from paycheck to paycheck and you're playing the shell game in order to get things paid, you don't have money to feed your children or to feed yourself. You're calling the insurance company to get them to give you a gallon of gas because you don't have money to put gas in your car. Then you need to look at another means. And that means bankruptcy, so that you can live. But if your situation is not that dire, then we need to look at the debt. We need to then align it. What's the interest rate? We should know what interest rate we're paying on each piece of debt that we have. Then we need to determine how we're going to go about getting rid of it, whether it be approaching the item with the lowest amount of interest or the highest amount of interest or the lowest amount of debt that we have. And we need to attack those things one by one. We need to stop relying on grace. Grace is for the church or whatever God you have. We need to be paying things early so that we can actually decrease the amount of interest that we're paying on them over time. And then we need to shy away from just everybody wanting to feed us a new credit card. Because one thing it is, when you start going through debt management and you start paying things off, then the person on the other side who needs you to be a consumer, because money makes money and money makes money off of interest and things. When they see you start getting rid of debt, then they're going to start to try to wheel you back in. And so you've got to have that self-control. And in that process, so if you're in Alcoholics Anonymous, the first thing they tell you to do after you acknowledge that you're an alcoholic is to change your circle. If you're trying to get out of debt and you know all your friends are about spend, 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 they can't have an honest conversation about what's going on with them and their money, you need to put yourself in another environment to get to where you need to be in order to be financially healthy.
let me say this real quick, because you make such a wonderful point. I remember many years ago, I was having a conversation on the phone with one of my fraternity brothers, and I made a comment to him about the fact that I just paid off my car. And this was at least 5 years ago. And he said to me, he said, "Well, I know you're about to go ahead and get a brand new Jaguar or something like that." And I said to him at the time, I said, "No, I'm fine with what I have, because the car is paid off, and we're talking about more than $400 a month that I no longer had to pay. I still have that car. And I just did get another car. But with that said, but for 5 years, I've not had a car payment. And I was able to put that 400 and some odd dollars towards other things that I needed to put it towards. And I think, and for me, Muriel, and Dr. Telemark, it wasn't so much about just having the extra $400, but again, having the mindset to say to a dear friend, I don't have to keep up with the Joneses. I don't have to show out and feel no shame, feel no guilt, as they say, feel some kind of way, because I'm not going to just turn it around and get a fat ride, a fat whip. And I think as you're saying, I didn't need to change my circle, but I did need to change how I addressed these issues.
And that's a degree of courage, and that's the courageous conversation that I'm encouraging us to be willing to have with those who we hold dear. Because if you're going to go the next step to bring a degree of health and wealth into your family, into your lifestyle, our circle is our extended family. And I would assume that we want them to experience the same great things that we're experiencing. Just that example that you just gave, a servant saving $400 a month on a car payment, not making a car payment for over 5 years, that's roughly $25,000 that you had as disposable income, let's say, quote unquote, that as you invested it year over year, in the last 5 years, the market has done some crazy things. And so when we talk about compounding, no, you didn't need to. You took that $25,000, invested it over 5 years, and that's, right now. Now, if you wanted to go buy you a Jaguar, you would have a decent down payment because you let the money work for you. Those are the kind of conversations. That's the the coffee conversation between the girls, or the wine conversation between the girls, the scotch and the cigar conversation between the brothers. And it's the type of conversation that we have to be willing to have with each other, because it is cash that is king, not credit. Credit has some value, but credit ain't going to get you where cash is going to get you. And we've got to be willing to have that ownership conversation with us, like my colleague is having with the students. How are we going to own the land as we're owning whatever, shoes or businesses, etc.? Then we can determine what the outcome is going to be. Credit ain't owning us nothing. Credit is helping somebody who owns us to have more control of us.
Dr. Telemark, I've got a good 30 seconds for you for some final thoughts about the attitudes about money from your perspective.
Sure. All right. So you asked earlier, what is it that we can do to help solve the problem?
Yes.
I'd probably say, from the position I sit as an educator, I would have to educate, right? And so I would get probably very technical, because my background is econ and finance.
But you're not getting, let me stop you. You're not getting technical with your boys. And I'm not talking about the students. I'm talking about your boys.
Well, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Harold, we are of the same clan, Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated.
Exactly. And you got 30 seconds, Doc. Come on.
and I would say sometimes I do get technical with them, right? And the only technical aspect I would say here is, if you paid the $100 at a 15% interest, and let's just say that interest was compounded annually, I would just teach them how to say, if you took 10 years to pay this, your $100 Jordans would be $400, and assess that value. Is that what you want to pay? If that's what you want to pay, that's fine. And so from an educator's point of view, I just have to provide the information.
Yeah, there you go. I appreciate it. That's going to have to be the last word, but I want to thank both of you for sharing your insight on this issue. Hopefully we can help somebody, get out of debt and move the money that they make into constructive spending investments. Get rid of that GDD, that gross domestic debt. Thank you both so much. That is the Daily Drum for this Tuesday, July 30th. I'm Harold Fisher.